Hi, my name's David Rodwin, and this is The Life. So the documentary 99% is about the Occupy Wall Street movement, and I'm not sure what it's really trying to communicate and to whom. Because I feel like if you've been watching the news, even just a little bit, you've heard a great deal of what this documentary already has to say. When I asked the filmmakers afterwards who they meant for the audience to be, they said anyone who only watched mainstream media. And maybe I don't have a good sense of things because I was watching a lot of the live streaming that was coming from both Occupy in New York as well as in Los Angeles. I watched a ton of YouTube videos that took place at the marches, and I was a part of Occupy Los Angeles. I was down there. I spoke to city council. I was actually very involved. But because of that, I have a certain insight into the actual experience of being there, and I feel like the film did not capture that at all. The filmmakers said they wanted to create context for the people who didn't know that much about Occupy. And I suppose the film could be helpful to that kind of an audience in that it sort of gives you a survey of what happened, but it feels more like a historical artifact than it does something that is useful today, that provides any greater, deeper insight as to both what happened, why it happened, and what the future holds. Another interesting thing is that the filmmakers went out of their way in the question and answer afterwards to say that they were not part of Occupy Wall Street.
Does not being part of the movement give me more objectivity in making a film about it? And I think definitely the answer is yes.
We put a lot of effort and thought and energy into having the film not be terribly lopsided.
People often think that documentarians, that the subjects of their films are proxies for them. And that just simply isn't the case.
Despite the fact they showed up at Zuccotti Park just a few days after Occupy began, and they started taping all the way until they tore up Zuccotti Park.
I sort of accepted a long time ago I cannot be objective. You know, we all, I think, sort of dealt with this to make a collaborative film. So you have an enormous amount of points of view.
That was the idea, that the more subjective points of view we could blend together, maybe we could achieve some semblance of objectivity. But you know, in the era of Fox News and balancing, there's just really only so much you can look at what's happening in our government and be like, you know, are there two sides? Really?
Honestly, I don't think they're being objective. And when I talked with them afterwards, I asked them, why didn't you show more of the underbelly of the Occupy movement? Because while you can still believe in everything that Occupy stands for, the actual running of Occupy, at least in Los Angeles, in my brief experience in New York, it was chaos, and you can show the good things as well as the bad things. I appreciated that they brought in some talking heads like Matt Taibbi, who explained what the larger forces were that brought Occupy to be. But the only person who they gave any time to actually criticize Occupy was Naomi Wolf, who clearly stands for many of the things that Occupy has been heralding. But she said, I think quite rightly, that in a movement that is absolutely leaderless, where everyone is on the same plane, it's extremely difficult to gain any kind of momentum as a movement. And if you look back historically, anytime you see a social movement that doesn't have a leader, it falls apart. And unfortunately, that is what's actually happened with Occupy. And here's another failing of the film. They don't talk about how everyone within Occupy was talking about Occupy 2.0. People were beginning to put together plans of what was going to happen when the camps were actually dismantled. And I strangely was looking forward to it because there was such chaos in the camps. I thought we could be more effective and get more work done and make a greater impact on the country and the issues that we were all talking about by actually becoming a different kind of organization, one that does not necessarily occupy space, but one who occupies the media, one who occupies the mind of the nation. But for reasons I don't understand, they never even touched what was going to happen after Occupy. They also didn't leave the viewer with any feeling that they could still participate or how they could get involved, when in fact there are still some things going on. In New York City, Occupy Sandy was an amazing relief effort that is still ongoing. It's basically been a volunteer posse of people who are coming in where FEMA hasn't. I'll also say my favorite parts of the film were when they actually went outside of New York City. While Los Angeles was almost not shown on screen at all, they did show some footage in Oakland that I had not yet seen before of one of the crazy nights where the Oakland police just literally went ballistic on the protesters. But even more than that, they had an entire section about this woman in Minneapolis who I believe was the first one who started an Occupy of her own home after it had been foreclosed upon. So instead of people just sitting out in front of City Hall or in some random park, they actually went to a person's home whose home had been foreclosed on, and they refused to let the bank take it back. And eventually, the woman was successful, or I should say Occupy was successful in defending that woman's home. Now, this went on in the Los Angeles area and in a number of other places around the country, but it was extremely time consuming. It took a lot of people on the ground because you're literally filling up a house with people. Dozens of people come in and they sleep in your living room, in your den, in your kitchen. And then when the sheriffs show up to take all your stuff out, they don't know what to do. And eventually, the bank relents. Listen, I'll be happy if PBS or HBO or whoever picks this up and it gets some broadcast time so a few million people, especially the older people, the folks who feel very much like Occupy was a threat and not about them, maybe they'll see this and get an idea of the larger scope of the movement and why it came to be, and maybe their idea of Occupy will be changed. But I can't say I found the film revealing, I can't say I found the film insightful, and I can't say I found the film emotionally charged, and it should have been all of those things. They also declared this was a collaborative film project, but at the Q&A it also became pretty clear that there were just a few people in charge, and while there might have been 2 or 3 directors, it was nothing like the collaborative thing that Occupy was. So while it wasn't a badly made movie, it could have been so much more. Lord knows there was so much footage that people shot about Occupy, and you could do an entire documentary just about the live stream people. In some ways, I feel like they spread themselves so far too thin that they didn't say anything. And instead, if they had told a personal story, or 2 or 3 personal stories of someone's extraordinary transformation by being a part of Occupy, that could have been a far, far more powerful film. So hopefully someone else is taking all the amazing footage that's out there and putting together something actually moving. Something that could convince people that being a part of Occupy was not just worthwhile, but it was a patriotic act. My name's David Rodwin, and this is The Life.
I just was sure I was going to make it. I didn't wait for the right amount of money. I knew that we just had to get the ball rolling, and I think that's a really important thing, especially for women filmmakers, you know. It's not